Firstly, I'm struck. They're both exciting things, but also quite daunting. Exciting because when you actually seek to live and bring justice and compassion in, it's exciting to see the difference it makes. But daunting, just because actually it's often quite hard to do that personally. In practice, for me, I have a particular beacon verse. One of my beacon verses is from the Old Testament, Micah 6:8, which says, "And what does the Lord require of you but to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God?" Many parts of the church use that as a beacon verse, but I think people often miss the context, and the context comes in verses 9 to 16, where Micah says, "And listen, the Lord is calling to the city." And then he goes on to talk about how do you apply justice and compassion and humility in the way you do business. So I'd love just to comment on that. I think there's two or three areas I'd love to touch on. One of those is how do we spend our money as a consumer? A second one is how do we just go about our work or our business? And the third one is how do we use our capital? All of it, thinking about how do we both bring justice and compassion into those. So firstly, if I just look at how do we use our money as a consumer, it's so easy within capitalism just to think of price and quality. But if we don't think of values as well, then capitalism is a very empty and a very unattractive mechanism. And I think really how do we bring values in? One of the great things that I've had the sort of pleasure of being involved with, privilege of being involved with, is fair trade. Because it's a way of actually ensuring that the producer of those commodities, whether that happens to be chocolate or bananas, are getting a fair price for what they're producing. And it's great to have many churches involved with that. Secondly, within our work, and again, I don't think we talk about this much, but we are much more within the Ambassadors Program, how do we bring justice and compassion into our work? And for me, that means things like acting with integrity and transparency rather than thinking, what can I get away with? And for me, that is ensuring that we often get a win-win situation where people feel pleased to have done business with us rather than feel afterwards, what got away with? And then the third area I'd like to touch on is that of capital assets, because for many Christians above a certain age, the most significant asset they have is not their income, it is actually their capital assets, which they might have built up. But we often don't talk about how we're using our capital assets to bring justice and compassion. And I just want to mention one area, and that is a charity that I've worked with called Hope into Action, who rent out properties for homeless people or people coming out of prison, but they rely upon people using their capital to buy a house to then be rented out. So with an old friend, we've gone and bought a house in Reading, which is then rented out through Hope into Action, and there are 3 homeless people who are now no longer homeless, but have got a place that they can call their own because of using our capital. And for me, that's an exciting way of how do we use our capital to make a difference both in justice and compassion.